This is the Education Gadfly Show.
Welcome to the Education Gadfly Show. I'm Stephanie Disler, here to kick things off for this week's episode. Today, Mike's back with another solo edition to dig into the latest NAEP scores and what they might have to do with the rise of smartphones and social media. Then, on the Research Minute, Adam Tyner shares a new REACH study showing that school voucher programs have boosted private school enrollment by just 3%, but have been putting upward pressure on tuition. All this and more on the Education Gadfly Show, starting now.
Hello, this is your host, Mike Petrilli of the Thomas B. Fordham Institute, here at the Education Gadfly Show and online at fordhaminstitute.org. And friends, I am back for another one of my monthly solo podcasts. This time I'm reaching you from Fordham's Washington, D.C. offices. Don't get used to this glorious decor, though, because we plan to let our lease expire in the next few months. We're going to go fully remote, which I'm sure we should have done years ago. There's not a strong argument for think tanks to have to come into the office every day, though we do still enjoy getting the team together for lunch every month, which we will keep doing here in Washington. We get together with our Ohio team at least once a year. If you've got good experiences with this fully remote thing that you can share with me, I'd love to hear about it. And speaking of loving to hear about things, I've also been busy because this week, I guess it's now last week, I launched a new Substack newsletter. Just like almost everybody you know, I now have a Substack. This one is called Schooled. And the idea here is to try to restart the ed reform conversation, to really feature education opinions from left, right, and center from around the internet, and also to feature a lot of reader reactions to really get a good conversation going on the big issues of the day. So if you haven't seen that yet, please check it out, Schooled. I'm aiming to do that every Tuesday and Friday mornings with occasional breaks. Already, I can tell that is quite a lift. So we'll see how that goes. But the reaction has been great so far. I really appreciate it. So thank you for that. I should also tell you that I am recording this a bit early this week. Right now it's Friday afternoon. This comes out on a Wednesday morning. I say that because at this moment, we know that Charlie Kirk's assassin has been caught and has confessed, but we don't know anything more about his motive. So I'm sure there's going to be many, many news cycles to come before you listen to this. And I just want to say, of course, how awful I think this is. I was not somebody that followed Charlie Kirk a lot, as people have told me I was not his target audience as a 50-something person, but many 20-something people I know did listen to his podcast, followed his work, and are, of course, deeply saddened by this, as we all should be. You know, I think we all agree that we want to live in an America, yearn to live in America, where this kind of political violence is exceedingly rare, and certainly much rarer than it's been recently. I suspect we'll see some stories, again, you might have already seen them by now, about whether there's anything schools can do to help with this issue around the vitriol, the political violence, helping the rising generation find common ground, work out political disagreements without this kind of awfulness. And especially since Charlie Kirk's life was committed to getting young voters more engaged in politics. And look, honestly, I'm not sure there is much that schools can do. I'm sure some schools will preach platitudes to their students, about listening to other people and about trying to find common ground. But teenagers especially are known to roll their eyes at those kinds of lectures. As always, what matters is not what we say, but what we do. And so all of us have to model for young people what it means to have conflict and be able to solve those conflicts peacefully, and to listen to the other side, and to, not let our policy disagreements lead us to a dark place where we view half the country as some kind of other. And of course, we especially need our political leaders to step up and say that we denounce any use of political violence. There's no place for it in a democracy. We denounce categorizing our political opponents as enemies and as others. Now, of course, high schools could and should engage students in discussions about events like this. Just last night, I was at back to school night at Walt Whitman High School in Bethesda, Maryland, and was glad to hear that my son's 12th grade political psychology class, which is a class there, which is pretty cool, that they tackled this, of course, went into it, had a 45-minute discussion with 36 kids trying to talk about how they felt about this assassination, but also how it relates to issues around polarization and social media and all the rest. And that sort of thing should certainly continue. And maybe we need more of it. All right. On that, let's turn to the main topic at hand that we are going to cover now in Ed Reform Update. Okay. And the topic at hand is, of course, and sadly and soberingly, the nation's declining NAEP scores. We had another tranche of results come out last week, 8th grade science, 12th grade math and reading. And as we've been seeing now year after year, ever since the pandemic, nothing here came as a surprise. We expected to see big declines, and big declines we got. The big question on everyone's mind is why? What is causing this? Of course, there's the pandemic, but as Eric Hanushek pointed out in a new analysis for the Hoover Institution and in an op-ed for the 74, the declines really started around 2013. And he did an analysis really before these latest scores came out, but looking at 4th and 8th grade reading and math and the other subjects, about half of the declines happened pre-pandemic. So as bad as it was going over the pandemic cliff and school closures and all of that, and it was bad, right? We lost that much ground between 2013 and 2019 without a pandemic, without school closures. And so what the heck was happening back then that might explain it? Marty West had a great piece in Education Week, and he joined a chorus of people, including Nat Malkus, Chad Alderman, and yes, yours truly, arguing that, look, maybe it is the phones, that phones, social media, screen time. The reason that this is a compelling explanation is that the timing lines up. Again, we said 2013 was when things started going south. That is right around the time that smartphones were becoming ubiquitous, when almost every American teenager had one. Eventually tweens as well as the rise of the many social media apps that we know today. Not necessarily love, but the Instagrams, the Snaps, and the rest. And so maybe that helps to explain it. Now, look, I've said and I've written many, many times that I don't think that's the whole explanation. I think especially in those early years, the declines could have been in part because of the Great Recession, if we remember that, which was bad for families, bad for child poverty, also bad for school funding, and which was very unusual, really probably the first time in American history school funding actually did decline. And Kirabo Jackson and others have studied that and think that that can be linked to student achievement declines, especially for the poor kids who were hurt the most, who tend to be the lowest performing kids. Other people have said, look, it's also around the time that No Child Left Behind accountability lost steam, and then we switched to ESSA, so maybe that's part of it. So I don't think it's one thing, right? But is it the phones? It certainly seems like there's good reason to think the phones might be it. But let's go just a little bit deeper, right? Why? What exactly are the phones doing that's making it harder for kids to learn? I think a lot of us assume, and again, I've written this, that it's around attention. If you're used to staring at these screens and these TikTok videos now and, doing stupid games on your phone and you're playing video games and all of this clutter going on in your brain, maybe that's changing something about our neural circuitry that's making it harder to learn. Well, Dan Willingham in Education Next dug into that particular question, wrote an amazing article. I highly recommend it, looking at reams of studies about this question. And what he says is, look, the studies, this makes intuitive sense, but the studies just keep turning up null findings or nothing all that conclusive about this link between us, the phones and the screens and attention. And so that's puzzling. Well, what he argues in the end is that the real problem maybe isn't attention. It's not like it's virtually that our brains are actually changing. It's about motivation. That when we spend all this time in screen world, where we're getting this constant simulation and there's no boredom, right? And it's very pleasant to our brains, who like to just take in all of this, entertainment. It makes it harder than ever for us to get to motivate ourselves and motivate our brains to do things that are hard and uncomfortable, right? I mean, we experience this as adults, and our kids experience it too. And for kids, let's say for middle school and high school kids especially, that might mean it's making it harder for them, for example, to choose to study because the alternative is so appealing, to choose to do homework because the alternative is so appealing, to choose to go to sleep at a reasonable time because the alternative is so appealing, even to choose to go to school because the alternative is so appealing. So you've got screen world, which is so engaging, and then you've got school world, which has a lot of drudgery and boredom, and where you have to put in effort, intellectual effort, brain effort in order to learn, right? That it's not necessarily pleasant to sit down and write an essay in English, or to go home and do math problems, or to go home and do the English reading from some book that was written hundreds of years ago. Okay. And yet we know that if you're going to learn, those are the sorts of things that you need to do. Right. And so if it is this issue around motivation and effort, it might give us some clues then about what we need to do about it. Now, this is now me talking, not Dan Willingham. And I hope I got that article right. And maybe Dan can tell me if I butchered it. But if we do try to start thinking about, well, what are the policy prescriptions? What should we do? If it's about motivation and effort, that might give us some hints. I mean, first of all, of course, get the phones out of schools. I mean, there's broad agreement about that now, bipartisan. Bunch of states have passed bans, districts passing bans. Of course, you can't just ban it. You have to actually figure out how to implement a ban. You got to figure out the yonder bags or where you're going to lock the phones, or, you can't just say, oh, please, kids, keep it in your pocket. You got to actually, in my opinion, take the phones and lock them away. That is not easy to do. And by doing that at school, maybe it at least sends a signal to parents that, hey, these phones are really bad for kids. They're like smoking. And so you should, when you're at home with your kids, you should take the phones away from them then also, or at least have a lot of limits, oversight on screen time. Make them go to bed at a reasonable time. Don't let them keep their phone in their bedroom, all of that, right? But it's not just about the phones, right? I mean, that's a good place to start. But it's also about motivation and effort. And so another rule for policymakers, especially, is do not do anything that takes away tools from teachers when it comes to motivation and effort, right? Now, in my view, that means let's go back to some old school ways when it comes to things like grading, graduation requirements, even college admissions. Okay, so what do I mean? Let's take grading. I think, as many of you know, we just came out with a big survey at Fordham about what teachers think of the equitable grading practices that are sweeping the country, including, as one teacher called it, the Gifty 50, where teachers are told they may not give zeros even when kids don't turn in assignments or when they bomb a test, or you don't even show up for the test, right? They have to give a 50%. This is supposedly to keep kids motivated, because if you give a zero, it's such a low score. It's so far below a 60%, which is a D minus, they're never going to catch up. But of course, if you announce this in advance, if the kids know that's the policy, that no matter what, they're going to get a 50%, they take that into account as they decide whether to study for a test or do an assignment, work hard on things or not. There's also a bunch of policies out there saying you may not give points for homework or give points for class participation. But you know what? If you're trying to motivate kids to do homework and to participate in class, giving them a few points for that matters, right? These are the kinds of things that, at the very least, we should not be mandating these dumb policies on our schools. Even better, we should support teachers when they are trying to have high expectations. Another Fordham study from Seth Gershenson years ago showed that tougher teachers get more learning out of their students, even after they leave their classroom, not just while they're in their own classroom. Hugely important. We want to support those teachers who have high expectations, because they're the heroes, right? And if you don't show up for class, right, you should have points taken away from you. You should have a lower grade. You should have to go sit in detention, right? Because we're sending a message that this stuff matters, right? Likewise, when it comes to just high school in general, we've made it way too easy to graduate high school. I think probably it has never been easier in America to graduate from high school than right now. Uh, Fewer and fewer states require any kind of exit exam. The course requirements are largely a joke. Everybody knows that grade inflation's through the roof, again, because of what I just discussed. For kids who do somehow fail a class, there's now online credit recovery where they click through these programs, often in just a matter of a few hours, and suddenly, behold, they've passed the class, and we hand them a diploma that is worthless. This is the kind of thing that's not good if we think that motivation and effort matters. Likewise, with these new direct admissions policies that some states have, where students don't even have to apply to college anymore. They'll be directly admitted as long as they have a GPA of a certain of a certain level. Oftentimes, those levels are not nearly high enough. And again, it sends the message to kids. You can go through the motions. You can phone it in, so to speak, right? You can, not put in the effort. You can spend your time doing other things like doom scrolling all day long or playing video games, and you can just go through the motions and not only get decent grades, not only graduate from high school, but go to college too, as well. All right. Now, I'm sure some people out there will say, well, the other thing you can do around motivation and effort is to make school more engaging and more fun. And that is true to a point. I think some great teachers know how to do this, right? Giving kids some more choices sometimes makes sense. I remember David Brooks saying, at some point in high school, we should let kids specialize more, like major in a subject. There's probably something to that. I certainly, as you know, love the idea of high quality career tech, which can be much more engaging for a lot of kids than the normal academic route if that's something they're no longer interested in. But it can't all be fun and games, right? No matter what, at some point to learn from grades K to 12 and beyond, right? Your whole life, right? To learn, you have to push through what is now our brain's desire to not have to do any hard work, right? So we have to help teachers, help students, help their brains do what it takes to learn. And I hope that our policymakers, again, at the state level, local school boards, can keep that in mind in the weeks and months and years ahead. All right, that's what I had to say today. Now it's time for everyone's favorite Adams Research Minute. Adam, welcome back to the show.
Great to be back.
And I should welcome you too, David, since I went solo this week. Welcome back, David Griffith.
Yes, thanks for having me, guys.
Yeah. So, Adam, I got to say, Baker Mayfield, he of Oklahoma, had quite the game on Monday night. Another comeback victory. He's playing some great football. You should feel very proud of him.
We are. He's my favorite OU player of all time, I think. I was there in the shoe when he planted the flag.
Was that right?
As a Michigan fan, you should appreciate that.
I do appreciate that, actually. I do. Yes. They're doing a spoof on that in the Dr. Pepper ads this year about somebody planting a flag. Very nice. Well, look, I just feel bad for our colleagues in Ohio because, when he was in Cleveland, what's that?
Because Ohio State's number one.
No. I was not going to refer to that team. I do not refer to that team ever, if I can help it. No, I'm going to refer to the Cleveland Browns, where Baker Mayfield was before. And he was okay, but not great. And then he goes to Tampa and he's amazing. It's almost as if the Cleveland Browns maybe aren't very good at football. All right. David, did you want to get in on something there? Did you have
No,
something?
you know what? Let's transition to research.
Okay, fine. Everybody's in a hurry. Fine. All right, Adam, what you got for us on the education research front?
Well, today's study takes us inside one of the most heated debates in education policy, and even here in the Fordham Institute offices, and that topic is school vouchers. When states make vouchers available to every family, how does the private school market change, and who benefits? This new paper is from the Reach Center at Tulane University, and it is based on a brand new data set that they created by merging several federal and nonprofit sources. The Private School Survey, which we've used before, the Private School Review, and financial filings from the National Center for Charitable Statistics. This new, more comprehensive data set lets them track both tuition levels and enrollment across a wide swath of private schools in 45 states, ranging from elite prep academies to tiny church basement schools charging just a few $1,000s a year. As best I can tell, this is the most comprehensive study of private schools ever attempted. The paper examines the recent adoption of universal vouchers. That means programs that, starting in states like Arizona, West Virginia, and Iowa between 2021 and 2023, made nearly all K-12 students eligible for public funds to attend private schools. And to be clear, they're not making any distinction between vouchers and the program some states call education savings accounts. But the timing means that this analysis is really just focused on the short-run effects of these newly launched programs. They apply a couple of different difference in difference style models to compare states that adopted universal vouchers to those that haven't. They also dig into the heterogeneities, looking at whether effects of new vouchers are different in small versus large schools, low tuition versus high tuition schools, and religious versus secular ones. What they find is that, on average, universal vouchers have raised private school tuition by about 10 to 15% and nudged enrollment up by 3 to 4% in the short term. But the effects are not uniform. Smaller schools and those with low baseline tuition are most likely to hike prices, sometimes by as much as 13%. That pattern makes sense in a place like Iowa, where tuition levels are generally lower than the voucher amount. There, one of the studies that they cite in the literature review found a tuition bump in that state of around 10%. Religious schools, by contrast, often used vouchers to expand enrollment without raising prices as much, while non-religious schools were much more likely to raise tuition. Those small effects of enrollment, remember it was just 3 or 4%, mean that at least in the short term, the vast majority of voucher dollars are simply a windfall for families who are already enrolled in private schools. But why are the effects on enrollment so small when vouchers cut the net price of private school by 50 to even 80% or even make it free? They do a lot of thinking about the different types of market pressures that are shaped by vouchers and other factors. And they basically argue that the story is about the short run, where families are reluctant to change schools when their kids are already enrolled. We know that parents often buy their homes because of the local public schools. And they say that besides that, private schools might be full, they might be slow to expand, or they might be selective and not really interested in expanding at all. And both parents and schools may be hesitant to reorganize their decisions around vouchers when they're new and controversial. After all, maybe the political winds change and the program goes away or gets constrained by budget caps. Over time, though, as word spreads and the program matures and the schools adjust, the impacts certainly could be much larger. The big picture here is that universal school vouchers are already reshaping the private school market, although slowly. In the first few years, tuition has crept up, enrollment has nudged upward. But if the programs persist, the authors expect broader shifts, more low and middle income families crossing into private schools, more charters actually converting to private status to get away from regulations, and sharper competition for public schools that can't select their students or teach based on a religious belief or anything. Now, I think their descriptive analysis of private schools is also really notable. Most of the time when people talk about private schools, the image that pops into their heads is like, Sidwell Friends or Exeter or some other elite institution. This paper reports that the typical private school is actually small and inexpensive. Our big city friends may not believe it, but the most common type of private school in the United States is one that has about 30 students and charges about $5,000 for tuition. That's the modal school. Average tuition is about $13,000, which is a lot more, but probably still sounds pretty cheap to folks who are living on the coast. Overall, and I'll end with this, universal vouchers represent an important change in how American families can pay for schooling. In the short run, the main effect is to subsidize families already in private schools, but in the medium and long run, as inertia fades and the schools adapt, the private school sector may grow and evolve in ways that reshape the way we do our schooling in the states, at least in the states that have these policies.
Nicely done, Adam, and nicely done, Doug Harris and the Reach Center. Yeah, I mean, it sounds like pretty much what we would expect. I've certainly argued that this is a windfall, especially for wealthy parents. Maybe unfair to call it a windfall when you're talking about, say, working class parents who are really scraping and scrounging to be able to afford a private school for their kids, maybe because the other public options are just terrible or totally opposed to their own values. And so if somebody's making 50,000 a year and they're figuring out a way to pay for one of those pretty inexpensive private schools, I don't think that's the same kind of windfall I worry about as somebody making $500,000 a year and sending their kid to one of those elite schools and now just getting an $8,000 check from the state. It is interesting, this question of will the schools respond and will families respond? Education is sticky. Is that maybe inelastic? Is that a way to describe the market? People only make these decisions to change schools usually once a year, and they often, ideally not that often, right? I mean, if you're happy, you're going to not probably rock the boat until it's time for your kid to go to a new level of schooling. Like, okay, it's time for middle school or it's time for high school. I don't know. I am still skeptical that we're going to see a huge supply response, especially given that the amount of money we're talking here is still pretty low in most places. But I don't know. David, what do you see here?
Yeah, I mostly agree. I mean, I don't really want to disagree with you on any points, but or the authors, right? But I just think there's so many more factors to consider, right? I mean, just in terms of like trying to figure out how many people are going to do this, it's fascinating to continue to consider all the things that go into the calculation, right? I mean, it is the case that peer quality is higher in private schools. I don't think anybody really denies that, right? But it's also the case that like the authors say, they're really like they would be underfunded if they were traditional public schools, right? So I am a private school kid for K through 8. I think the tuition was like $7,000. My graduating class was 13. We had goats. So this doesn't, I'm from the West Coast. This doesn't ring as this isn't as surprising to me as perhaps it is to people who are from New York or Boston. But I mean, if you told me that you were going to run a traditional public school on $5,000, I'd say that's insane. You can't run a school on that. And yet here we have an entire sector that's running on that. There's a real trade-off there, right? And it also makes it very difficult to make any sort of projections about how families are going to view that trade-off, how the schools themselves are going to perform as they get more money, but also a more representative set of students, right? I mean, the average traditional public school, if you just ask my friend ChatGPT, it's like $15,000 now. That's 3 times as much money. It matters. Right? You can't really render a definitive judgment about vouchers or anything else. I mean, as listeners know, I'm a skeptic, right? I look at the charter, the history of the charter school movement, and I think, there's real downside risk here. We need some regulations to address that downside risk. But one of the harder sort of counter arguments to overcome is, look, we just aren't spending enough money to render any final verdict about any of these programs yet. And so anyway, I think it's kind of fascinating to consider how this is going to play out, because there are a million things happening at once.
And
it's one of the things that I really like about Doug Harris has done this in a few of his papers that I've reviewed now. And I think there's one that I reviewed for the show here a couple years ago where he did a similar thing. But he has this thing where he kind of he's building an econometric model of like how people's decisions work, but he like describes this all as like, well, he just describes it in a really intuitive way from the different actors' perspectives. I find it really like helpful to like have him as just like thinking through all of the kinds of trade-offs that schools are making and parents are making. It's a cool part of some of the research that he's done.
Yeah. And I would think, I think we would expect every school to raise their tuition up to the level of whatever the voucher or education savings account is worth, right? Like, why wouldn't they eventually do that? Now, there's some people hoping that the education savings account model encourages parents to be choosy on price, right? The idea being, well, Arizona gives you $8,000. If you find a private school that's only $6,000, you can use the other $2,000 for something else, like a laptop or tutoring, or you can bank it. Well, I'm not sure you can actually bank it in Arizona, but that's been a proposal in some places. Bank it.
I think in Florida it can roll over. And they actually argue in the paper that that may be the reason why you haven't seen price increases as much in Florida.
All right. So, okay, that's interesting. So maybe that mechanism is actually working because you do want parents to have price be considered as part of their decision. At least if you think that's a good thing as a sort of a fiscal conservative, or you want schools, you don't want you don't want to distort the market in a way where the private schools just raise their tuition up to the voucher amount. And then, you don't, and there's no more low cost options. Maybe that's not a good thing.
Yeah. I mean, we don't want them spending money on like tennis courts. Right. But I don't know. I guess I always find these arguments very strange as a center left person, because I'm like, look, I thought investing in education was good. And, I don't personally, right. Like my view on that doesn't change if it's a private school, right? Like you're still going to get better teachers and smaller class sizes and, better facilities. If everybody is willing to pay a little bit more for the education. So I don't know. I don't know why we're so reluctant to accept that Americans want to spend money on their kids. Like,
I don't know why you're so against tennis courts.
I don't. Yeah, right. Exactly. Well, I mean, I'm not against tennis courts, but fair point.
Especially with those frickin' paddleball people. We need more tennis courts, let me tell you.
I mean, the range isn't I did skim the study. The range of private tuition is just staggering, right? It runs from under 5,000 to 150,000. So it's insane to make any sort of generalization about it. All right.
Well said. All right. Hey, great stuff, Adam. Thank you. Nice to see you, David. That is all the time we've got this week. So until next week,
I'm David Griffith.
And I'm Mike Petrilli of the Thomas B. Fordham Institute, signing off.
The Education Gadfly Show is a production of the Thomas B. Fordham Institute, located in Washington, D.C. For more information, visit us online at fordhaminstitute.org.